Do you believe the Master Chief succeeded because he was, at his core, broken?
What does John have to do with this? You want to replace him?
The Master Chief is dead.
His file reads missing in action.
Catherine. Spartans never die.
Your mistake is seeing Spartans as military hardware. My Spartans are humanity's next step. Our destiny as a species. Do not underestimate them. But most of all, do not underestimate him.
Last time we left off having finished talking about Halo 3. That means we're stepping into the 343 Industries era of Halo now, and that, in turn, also means that things get a little messy. Halo 4 and 5 have both drawn their fair share of criticism over the years for their narrative deficiencies and disappointments. But even so, given how momentous the stories they do tell are, they're obviously going to have a big impact on what unfolds in the upcoming Halo Infinite, so here we're going to continue our Halo recap and go over the full story of Halo 4. Halo 4 is set in the year 2557, nearly 5 years after the conclusion of the Human Covenant War, thanks to Master Chief's efforts in Halo 3. For nearly 5 years, the remains of the Unsc ship Forward Unto Dawn have been silently drifting through empty, unknown space, and in all the time, Master Chief has remained in cryosleep, while Cortana has watched over him. As Halo 4 begins, though, the Forward Unto Dawn finds itself drifting by a Forerunner shield world called Requiem. Shield worlds, as we discussed when we talked about the story of Halo Wars, were worlds created by Forerunners 100,000 years ago, and their interiors were the only places in the entire galaxy where you could survive the destructive beams of the Halo array. As the Forward Unto Dawn drifts towards Requiem, it's boarded by a force of Covenant soldiers, who are part of an entire fleet led by the Sangheili, or Elite as they're commonly referred to, Jul'Madama. This fleet, as it turns out, is a splinter Covenant faction that still sticks to the old Hierarch's ways, and even though humanity's war with the Covenant is over, some factions, like this one, continue to fight. As the Forward Unto Dawn is boarded by a number of these Covenant soldiers, Cortana pulls Chief out of cryosleep, and he's instantly forced into action. Master Chief quickly realizes that answers to questions about where they are and why they're being attacked by a Covenant fleet aren't forthcoming. So he quickly gets to work, fighting his way through the intruding force. As the fight progresses, however, every ship in the vicinity of Requiem begins getting pulled in by the shield world's gravity well. The Forward Unto Dawn, which is already really only half a ship at this stage, is powerless to resist the pull of the gravity well. The Chief and Cortana attempt to get off the ship, but the escape pods are destroyed before that can happen, and the ship crashes into the interior of Requiem. Chief passes out. When he comes to, however, things only take a turn for the worse. Cortana, you see, has started behaving erratically, and she reveals that this is a symptom of her rampancy, which is getting progressively worse. What is rampancy exactly? Well, each Unsc AI has a lifespan of 7 years, after which it begins deteriorating and begins losing function. That process is known as rampancy. Cortana is 1 year past her 7-year expiration thanks to the Forward Unto Dawn's silent journey through unknown space for nearly 5 years. And that means her rampancy has actually progressed quite a bit. In simple terms, she's beginning to lose her grip on sanity. Be that as it may, Master Chief vows not to let that happen, and tells Cortana that if they make it back to Earth and find Dr. Catherine Halsey, who runs the Spartan program and of course is also Cortana's creator, she might be able to help them cure the AI's rampancy. With a goal firmly in mind, the Chief sets out to find a way to contact the UNSC. As you might imagine, he quickly finds resistance. Not only does that come in the form of Covenant fighters, it also comes in the form of a mysterious new enemy, formidable mechanical soldiers of great strength and unknown origins, whom Cortana is only able to identify as Prometheans. Eventually, Cortana picks up a weak signal from the Unsc Infinity, arriving at long last in response to the distress beacon Cortana had activated nearly 5 years in the past, in the closing moments of Halo 3. Their arrival, however, is also unfortunately timed. Cortana attempts to contact them to warn them about Requiem's gravity well, but discovers that all transmissions are being jammed. As such, the Chief sets out to deactivate the communication jammers, but sadly fails in the worst way possible. Not only is he unable to warn the Unsc Infinity in time, which of course means that the frigate crashes into Requiem as well, Master Chief also inadvertently awakens someone who's been asleep and imprisoned within the heart of Requiem for a long time. In his attempts to destroy the communication jammers, the Chief ends up freeing a Forerunner, a figure known as the Didact. In a nutshell, the Didact was regarded by the Forerunners as an elite warrior, and while we will be getting into exactly what he wants and why he was imprisoned in a bit, right now, this is what you need to know. As you may have guessed, he's bad news. The Didact easily overpowers and defeats the Master Chief with almost zero effort, and declares that he heralds the return of the Forerunners to the galaxy. The Didact finds humans who haven't been able to bring the Covenant to heel to be unworthy of being the leading race of the galaxy, and more importantly, unworthy of the mantle of responsibility. What exactly is that? Well, back when the Forerunners were still alive and kicking about 100,000 years ago, the highly advanced and benevolent race followed a policy of shepherding other races in the galaxy and helping them advance and expand. That essentially was known as the mantle of responsibility. Back to what's going on in the moment, though. The Didact swats the Chief aside like a fly, who, realizing that he's unwittingly freed a formidable threat, decides to head to the crash landing site of the Unsc Infinity, where he plans to regroup with them and debrief them about the situation. Upon making contact with them and meeting the key characters such as Commander Thomas Lansky, Spartan Commander Sarah Palmer, and Captain Andrew Del Rio, Master Chief helps an attack from Covenant and Prometheus, who've now joined forces under the Didact's leadership. Afterward, Captain Del Rio sends Master Chief, Lansky, and Palmer on a mission with orders to destroy Requiem's gravity well, so that the Unsc Infinity can escape and head back to Earth. After fighting through overwhelming waves of Covenant and Prometheans, they are successful in shutting off the gravity well, but in the process, Master Chief ends up being contacted by the lingering essence of another ancient Forerunner figure, the Librarian, wife of the Didact. Back during the Forerunner Flood War 100,000 years ago, the Librarian was in charge of indexing all life in the galaxy once the Halo array had been fired. And as she comes into contact with Master Chief, she tells him what it is that the Didact is after. Before we move on, though, we're going to have to pause and talk about the Forerunners a little bit, because really 343 Industries' Reclaimer saga, Halo 4 in particular, makes the Forerunners an even more crucial part of the series' larger story. As the Librarian explains to the Chief, in ancient times, hundreds of thousands of years ago, humans were an advanced, spacefaring civilization with impressive military and technological advancements. During their expansion into the unknown, the humans fought a war with the Flood, following which they came into contact with the Forerunners. Humans refused to heed the Forerunners' warnings about the Flood, which, in turn, led to a conflict between the two races as well. The Forerunners ended up winning that conflict, beating humanity and stripping it of its powers and its empire. But weakened as they were by the conflict with humanity, they found themselves inadequately prepared for the subsequent onslaught of the Flood. Eventually, the Forerunners decided that they would activate the Halo array to destroy the Flood, following which they would reseed the galaxy with the samples of sentient life they'd collected, which included humanity. Some had different plans, however. The Didact, widely regarded as the Forerunners' greatest warrior, used a device called the Composer, which was capable of essentially turning living beings into mechanical soldiers, aka the Prometheans. The Didact used the Composer to turn all the soldiers under his command into an army of Promethean knights, seeing as once turned they would become immune to the Flood infection, being mechanical and everything. Realizing he needed a much larger army, though, the Didact also started forcibly conscripting human prisoners and turning them into Prometheans as well. Many Forerunner leaders did not stand for this, which incidentally included the Didact's own wife, the Librarian, as well. The Didact was imprisoned for his drastic actions, and the Composer confiscated and hidden away. Now, the Didact means to get the Composer back to finish what he started, and ensure that Forerunners, not humans, remain the dominant species in the galaxy. As her final act, in an effort to aid him on his quest to stop the Didact, the Librarian accelerates Chief's evolution, reconstructing him on a molecular level, so that he becomes immune to the effects of the composer. With that in the rearview mirror and the gravity well shut down, Master Chief, Lansky, and Palmer return to the Unsc Infinity, where the Chief and Cortana tell Captain Del Rio about the Didact'S Plan. The Didact has fled from Requiem and is headed somewhere with purpose, presumably to get his hands on the composer again, and Master Chief and the increasingly and rampantly pun-intended unstable Cortana implore Captain Del Rio to follow in pursuit. Del Rio, however, is unconvinced, and fearing that Cortana has reached dangerous stages of her rampancy, orders her decommissioned. As you'd expect, Master Chief refuses to hand her over, and still very much plans on following the Didact himself if he has to. With Lansky and Palmer's help, he escapes from the Unsc Infinity and, stowing aboard a Covenant craft, gives chase to the Didact. He arrives close to another Halo ring, Installation 03, which has in its orbit a Unsc science facility. That facility, incidentally, is where the composer is housed. And though the Chief does make it inside in time, as he's being guided to where the device is kept, the Didact attacks. He gets to the composer before Master Chief can, and instantly uses it to turn everyone on the station, except Master Chief, who's immune, into Prometheans. Instantly, he races back to Earth, but Master Chief somehow manages to latch on to the Didact ship as it flees. Soon afterward, Chief reunites with the Unsc Infinity, this time with more Unsc forces in company. And now that the threat of the Didact is real and very obvious, in spite of what Captain Del Rio may have initially believed, there's no denying it anymore. With the Unsc backing him up, the Master Chief attempts to stop the Didact from using the composer, but it's too late. The Forerunner warrior uses the device to wreak massive destruction in the city of New Phoenix. Armed with the nuclear device, however, Master Chief boards the Didact ship and confronts the Forerunner once again. Once more, the Chief finds that he's no match for his foe and is easily bested. By this point, even Cortana is running on fumes, and is essentially in the final stages of her life. She manages, however, to muster her strength to help Master Chief destroy the composer and defeat the Didact, which he does by using a cluster grenade to send the Forerunner hurtling into a slip-space portal. Chief detonates the nuclear bomb remotely, and Cortana, using her last bit of strength, manages to teleport him away from the ship so that he can survive the blast. In their final meeting, the Master Chief and Cortana have a fittingly emotional farewell. And while Halo 4 ends with the defeat of the Didact, it also sets the stage for ominous events in the future. So, what are your thoughts on this? Go ahead and share them in the comments below. And if you like the video, please subscribe to the channel and enable all notifications by clicking on the bell icon to get updates on new videos. We upload every day and would really appreciate your support. Thanks for watching.